This is every pirate captain in One Piece ranked. Sort of, you'll find out why in a bit, but let's begin. And first up is the first pirate captain Luffy met in the series, a certain scarlet-headed Shanks, who served under the most famous pirate to have ever lived and mentored the future most famous pirate. And Shanks, mate, Shanks is pirate incarnate. He has everything a pirate captain needs: copious alcohol, a loyal crew, tons of fun adventures, and in fact the only thing he doesn't have is 2 arms. But missing limbs is also quite stereotypically piratesome, and with everything we know, I don't think it's arguable that Shanks is anything less than an S-tier captain. Moving horizontally along the found family tree, we immediately hit a clown captain, who, despite his numerous, and I mean very numerous, personal failures, has actually gone on to become a shockingly distinguished captain. Buggy'S leadership is best described as taking the concept of failure so far that it wraps all the way around and actually becomes the pinnacle of success. Buggy also has one of the most loyal crews in the entire series, a crew which is now one of the foremost influential in the world. Buggy possesses all of the least desirable qualities of a leader, but all of these factors have fused together in a process best described as somehow to create a nigh-on perfect pirate captain. And it's legitimately difficult to say that he belongs anywhere but the S tier. So we're starting off very top heavy, but do not worry, because next up we have Don Krieg, a man who has confused being a pirate for a knight, choosing to clad himself in golden armor, but also a man who has confused being a pirate for being a marine, as he gave himself the title of admiral within his fleet. Speaking of fleet, Don Krieg commanded 50 ships, and on his very first mission into the Grand Line, of those 50 ships, he lost, checks notes, 50 ships, so all of them, he lost all of them. Krieg is a pretty pathetic captain in every way, and we're going to stick him right in the D tier. In this case, D standing for dead, probably. But if Don Krieg was a knight, then our next captain would be his castle. But despite this identity crisis, Capone Gang Beige is a shockingly capable captain. What he lacks is power, solely power. Beige has everything else: wild ambition, an incredibly well-functioning mind-brain, and the respect and love of his crew, or I should say the respect and love of his family. In terms of the worst generation captains, Beige is absolutely one of the best, and that will become painfully clear shortly, but for now, he will be awarded with an A tier. However, next we move to the ultimate family man, Edward Newgate. Quite possibly the most capable leader of his time, quite possibly the most capable leader of all of the times, with the perfect mixture of peak power, peak emotional maturity, and peak mustache. I think it's next to impossible to come up with a better captain than Whitebeard, which is why we're opening a whole new mustache tier for Whitebeard to rest in peace in. Although I will say that his family obsession is very male-dominated. Lots and lots of sons, with only one daughter off the top of my head that I can think of, being Whitey Bay. But that actually brings us to something very important, which is the Whitebeard Captains. The reason why I can't rank every single captain in the series is mostly due to these guys, because there are 44 captains in total, and if I'm honest, I just can't be bothered to go through them all. So I'm sorry to anyone who desperately wanted to see me rank beloved character Forlywibs. I don't even know how you pronounce his name. Forlywebs? A character who only exists in the form of a hastily drawn sketch. But we're going to deal with all 44 of them by plonking them straight into the they exist tier, and we will never speak of them again. But next up is Eustace Captain Kid. I'm sorry, I can't even get through this without laughing. This may be a controversial opinion, but I'm not sure if Kid even qualifies to be on this list anymore. Kid may very well be the worst captain in the entire series, just repeatedly running his crew into wall after wall of Emperor until one of them finally put Kid out of his misery. I like Kid as a character, but as a captain, his work speaks for itself. And that work is saying, I'm a very bad captain, Liam. So we're going to open up a whole new separate tier that looks suspiciously like a garbage can, and we're going to place Junkyard Shanks exactly where he belongs. You know who's an objectively better captain than Kid? Goo. You heard right, I said Goo, a captain who appeared that one time during Thriller Bark. So at this point, I want to say that this is a curated list. I have left some captains off the list, mainly ones that popped up for like a handful of panels that no one remembers, but Goo is a very important exception. 2 years before Luffy began his journey, Goo and what I'm assuming were called the Goo Pirates got their shadows stolen by Gecko Moria in the Florian Triangle. And do you know what Goo did after that? He got on with his life. The Goo Pirates escaped the Florian Triangle, and despite not being able to exist in sunlight, continued to be successful pirates for the next 2 years until their shadows were returned. This crew sailed the Grand Line for 2 years without their shadows. They essentially eventually became nocturnal pirates and were still incredibly successful. And I have to give a great deal of credit to the superb leadership of Captain Goo, who can only be recognized as an A tier. In Goo we trust. For a similar story, we have Captain Charlotte Lola, but unlike Goo, she was unable to move on and condemned her crew to 3 years of darkness on Thriller Bark. During this time, Lola became much less of a captain and more of a support group leader. I mean, they eventually got their shadows back, and Lola even got married to Got T, but I don't know. After seeing how Goo handled this situation, I'm just not particularly impressed with Lola. She's nowhere near the worst. I mean, she certainly didn't Krieg her crew, but it's all a bit meh, and the universal symbol for meh is a C tier. But let's talk about the pirate captain who caused Lola and Goo's various problems, a certain Gecko Moria, best known as a channel meme and cultural fanbase icon for failure. And not the good kind of buggy failure either. We're talking about the bad kind, because get this. From the time Moria set out as a pirate to the time where his crew were kill-murdered by Kaido was less than a year. Now, to be fair, Luffy also lasted less than a year before the Straw Hats were broken apart, but he eventually put them back together. Whereas Moria tried to put his crew back together, quite literally, but it just didn't work quite as well, what with them all being corpses. He's a great character, a tragic character, but a captain, he's a bad captain, a tragic captain. He's not a good one. He's a bad captain man. And I think the only place for him here is right in the Kid can. But speaking of the man who broke Moria's hopes, dreams, and the bodies of his crew, we now have discipline enthusiast Kaido, a man who rules through a combination of fear and tight leather outfits mandated for all crew members. I can't even imagine just how much Kaido has spent on leather because there are 20,000 beast pirates to cover. That is the largest crew of any emperor by an order of magnitude. And honestly, this is why the people of Wano were starving, because Kaido spent this nation's entire GDP on leather outfits. But just like Buggy, I can't deny that this worked. Kaido is not in any way a good person, only dragon fish, but he was a damn fine captain and he dominated the seas for 2 whole decades. Questionable methods culminating in undeniable results that can only lead to the conclusion of S tier. Kaido destroyed so many other people's hopes and dreams along the way, including these next 3 captains. We're gonna deal with Basil Hawkins, Scratchman Apu, and Diaz Drake as a set, because when it comes to being captains, they all followed a very similar path. Each of them were technically captains, but eventually discarded their crews and became crew themselves. And really, post-time skip, half of the worst generation aren't even captains anymore. In fact, you know what? Let's also throw Jewelry Bonnie in here, because her crew disappeared pre-time skip. And what happened with all of these figures was a thorough Krieging, leading their crews to destruction and dismemberment. Drake is admittedly a bit of an exception. He had a mission, but also he's not enough of an exception for me to care. And they're all going straight down into the D tier. And this next character is a much better captain than all of them combined. It's Foxy, and no, this is not a joke, because Foxy knows how to stay in his lane. To this very day, he is still sailing the Grand Line, being a complete and utter cockwaffle, but achieving modest success whilst doing so. Foxy is very similar to Buggy in that his crew love him. The Foxy pirates adore Foxy. He has their utmost loyalty. And sure, Foxy may not have the greatest ambitions, morals, or aesthetic qualities, but as a captain, he's pretty damn solid and well deserving of a B tier. Alright, now let's get controversial for some much less fun reasons. Arlong is, I guess was, a captain, and for all of his racism, murder, various financial crimes, and of course child enslavement, I have to say that he ran a pretty efficient crew. This is the part where I have to point out that pirates are not usually good people. The Straw Hats are the exception, but like Foxy, Arlong knew how to stay in his lane. He picked a secluded corner of East Blue and ran a successful crew until he made but a single mistake, which was not honoring his deal with Nami. If he had, he'd still be terrorizing the sea to this very day. He's a bad man who did bad things, but that's what pirates usually are, and I think that makes Arlong a B tier captain. But now here's Hody Jones, who looks like the before picture of Arlong's weight loss program. And I'm going to do something very unusual here and give Hody Jones credit. Because weirdly enough, Hody Jones is responsible for building the single largest pirate crew in history. There were 100,000 members of the New Fishman Pirates, which for some perspective is the same amount of Marines who fought in the Paramount War. Hody's crew was literally 5 times the size of Kaido's. However, this is where the credit ends, because this feat was only surpassed by how quickly Hody ran the single largest pirate army in history straight into the ground. He was a lot more ambitious than Arlong, but also a lot less successful, all of which is going to even out at a B tier. But to examine the Fishman captain, we have Fisher Tiger, a man whose name evokes both fear and respect to this very day. And something we really haven't touched much on yet is charisma, arguably the most important quality of a captain. And Fisher Tiger is the perfect example of that. A man whose magnitude of charisma was enough to construct a crew consisting of both Jinbei and Arlong. And while Fisher Tiger didn't have the global impact of an emperor or a pirate king, he was still a phenomenal captain and very well deserving of an S tier. And while we're here, we're also going to chuck Jinbei into the A tier, because Jinbei is definitely on par with Gu when it comes to caring for his crew. Jinbei and Gu, they're like the dual paragons of responsibility. Boa Hancock also exists, mostly thanks to being freed by Fisher Tiger actually, and this is actually a rare example of a defensive pirate captain. The Kuja pirates are more like a national navy. They don't really exist to adventure and plunder, they exist to protect. In fact, being defined as pirates almost seems like a clerical error, and it is a technicality because to become a warlord of the sea, all of the Kuja tribe were filed under the definition of piracy, regardless of whether or not they actually sailed aboard the ship. But Hancock is charisma incarnate. Her own tribe are constantly in awe of her, to the point where I think they could be described as simps, an army of rabid female simps. And with that in mind, it's hard to place Boa Hancock below the A tier, but it's also very easy not to place her above the A tier because she is no Shanks. Also, Hancock's power to turn people into rocks is hard countered by our next captain, who is already a Rocks Diesebek, and despite the fact that we are currently unaware of his facial hair status, he is another easy mustache tier candidate. I think there's an argument to be made that Rocks is the greatest pirate captain in history, but I also think we need to bookmark that until we hear the full story. For now, the same cannot be said about the rest of his crew, particularly Miss Charlotte Lin Lin, a woman whose birth canal has seen more traffic than my local motorway. As a captain, Big Mom is pretty terrible, because her character is an exploration of what happens when a child has the power to demand desserts at all sorts of absurd times of day, even when it's not dessert time. In fact, especially then. And the heavy lifting of her empire is done mainly by the Big Mom pirates. And in fact, whenever Lin Lin actually issues an order, it tends to actively hinder operations. With that said, at least Big Mom has the power to back up her dumb ideas, so that keeps her safely out of the kid can, but not too far out, because as a captain, she is a definite D. But perhaps we can console Big Mom with some Blue Jam, a tasty but ultimately disappointing treat whose two greatest accomplishments in the series are as follows. 1, he beat up some children, and 2, he got beaten up by a children. But the worst part is that Blue Jam did all of this in the service of the Goa Kingdom. Imagine throwing your entire crew and pirate career away for the sake of Stelly. That is what Blue Jam did, and so we are going to throw him into the garbage. So instead of a Blue Jam, here is a Pink Flamingo, a man whose story is all too familiar in One Piece, a successful pirate entrepreneur whose extensive career was put to an end due to a fisting from a rubber man. Doflamingo's greatest problem as a captain is that he split his focus. Piracy was only one of the many pies that Doflamingo decided to penetrate with his manipulative string fingers, and as a result he spread himself a bit too thin by trying to break into business, politics, and general cockery. That is legitimately all that stops him from being an S-tier captain. The fact that he was more of a king, or I guess a CEO, than he was a captain, because they're very different things. But look, Doflamingo can have an A tier, and if he doesn't like it, then he can have a cry about it in prison. Much to the delight of Trafalgar Law, a man who has a polar bear and is therefore a clear A tier. Legitimately, do I need to say anything else? It's Law. We all know that he's good at things. A tier. To his current opponent, we find a Blackbeard, a man with an almost Roxian talent for putting together a crew of bungle nuts and having it actually pay off. He's a serious candidate to become the next pirate king and an easy S-tier captain. And for someone who smells almost as much like putrid seafood, it's Crab Hand Gyro. And Gyro, he did pretty alright, maybe. I mean, he accidentally himself into becoming a slave for the new fisherman pirates, but he did lead his crew to escape, mostly due to the good graces of Hody Jones, but a successful escape nonetheless. Fun fact, Crab Hand Gyro has a bounty of 73 million berries. So this man is worth almost as much as post-Enisobi Sanji, which is a fight I need to see. Black Leg versus Crab Hand. But in the end, we're looking at a bowl of meh chowder, so it's a C tier. Caribou is here now, and he's a D tier. He's rapidly becoming one of my favorite characters, Swamp Nakama represent, but he is not in any way a serviceable captain, D tier. Now here's Goldie Roger, a captain so amazing that the very concept of Pirate King had to be invented just to describe him. And I have no more words for Roger, nor does he have more words for us, but he does have a wonderful mustache, which is the undeniable tier that he belongs in. But also, Golden Lion Shiki. You know, thinking about it, Shiki is just Don Krieg scaled up. Because Shiki also lost a fleet of 50 ships in a battle against a single opponent, although his failure was mostly due to bad weather, so we'll cut him a bit of slack. In addition to cutting both of his legs off, which Shiki did himself. What a mad lad. But a mad lad destined for sea. And our next captain quite literally has sea in his name, despite being a space dweller. It's Captain Simaz. Simaz is currently both the greatest and worst space captain, primarily because he's the only one we know of. And he got one shot by NL, but to be fair, so does everyone. And with with the complete and utter lack of information, I think that we can only place Simaz in the C tier. But from sea to space to back down a bit to the sky, we have Mad Monk Arouge. Arouge is a top 5 worst generation captain, if only because there's only about 5 worst generation members who still have a crew. According to Echiro Oda, the flower Arouge most resembles is a daisy, which is lovely because daisies get pollinated by bees, just like how I'm going to pollinate Arouge with a B tier. And then we have Monkey D. Luffy. One day this man will be the greatest pirate captain the world has ever known. That day may even come quite soon. And when it does, we're going to need to open up a whole new tier. But for now, Luffy will take his place amongst his peers in the mustache tier. And that is every but not quite every pirate captain in One Piece ranked. Oh no, I just realized I forgot about the entire Grand Fleet. All 7 of them can go somewhere. I'm gonna let my editor decide, and here they are, this tier, this one, yay. And that is every but not every pirate captain in One Piece ranked arbitrarily by a man on the internet.